about our meeting of knowledge mobilization of the practice communities about the use of evidence in education that has as an objective to tackle the challenges in the region based on the data in order to improve the quality also in this context of post-COVID-19. This morning, we are going to talk about the use of the different measures of learning in order to inform the educational community and also to talk about the improvements in education. We thank you for being here with us, and we will start in a few more minutes. So, in order to strengthen multiculturalism, we have asked the speakers today to present in their mother tongue, considering diversity of audience that we have here with us. We have people from all over Latin America, the Caribbean, and even other regions. This way, we would like those who are here with us, we remind you that you can find in your screen the interpretation button where you can choose that option. In the lower part of the screen, you will see your preference language in order to listen to this event. This event will also be interpreted into English and Spanish. So any question that you may have, you can ask it. We are available. You can use that function or that button for questions and answers. For those who join us, we invite you to share through your social media the event hashtag Evidencia para la Transformación and hashtag Evidence for Change. Okay, so we are going to start now. We have our guests joining us. We want to welcome you again to this new meeting in this mobilization, knowledge mobilization cycle of KICSLAC SUMMA. And in these two sessions, we will be talking with different experts in the region about the challenges and strategies to strengthen the use of the learning results for the educational improvement. For us in SUMMA and in KICSLAC, it's an honor to have so many people from the educational field. We have more than 15 countries represented and many institutions for these 2 days of conversations. We are very happy to tell you that we have the presence with ACER, the Organization of the States from the Eastern Caribbean countries, the OEI, UNESCO, Caribbean Examinations Council, the Ministry of Education of St. Lucia, Nicaragua's Ministry of Education, the Teachers Union from St. Lucia, the International Center for Development, and GPE. We thank you all the speakers for accepting this invitation and that you are joining us today. Now, before we want to excuse that because of minor problems in his health, and Raul won't join us today, but he is here with us, supporting us. Raul is the director of KICSLAC initiative in the exchange of knowledge and innovation from SUMMA. He has worked in this project from the beginning. Thank you, Raul, for being here with us. We hope you're better tomorrow. You feel better tomorrow, and you can join us tomorrow. we acknowledge the effort you're doing in order to be here with us. Now, we'll start our webinar with the first presentation by Dr. Javier González, SUMMA Director. Javier is a specialized economist in equality, social innovation, and social development. He is the director of SUMMA and is an affiliated professor at the Center of Development Studies in the University of Cambridge, where he teaches institutional economics and political economy of development. He is also a researcher of the Millennium Science Nucleus in Social Sciences, Higher Education in Chile, hosted at the Pontificia Universidad Católica in Chile, and funded by the Chilean Ministry of Economy. Javier is a member of the Think 20 research groups related to G20, member of the UNESCO Advisory Board for the Global Education Monitoring Report, and is the co-editor of the UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report 2020 for Latin America, focused on inclusion. Thank you, Javier, for being here with us. The floor is yours. Thank you, Rosa Maria. Hold on a second, let me share my screen with you. Hope you can see it well. Perfect. Thank you so much to the KICS team and to all the organizations that are part of this event, GPE, the IDRC, OECS as a strategic partner, along with SUMMA, with whom we have encouraged or boosting this hub that is very important for the region and that somehow wants to help or support countries to prioritize their intervention and educational policies agendas, trying to get actions or to have actions that change and transform our educational systems. Not long ago, we were with the ministries of our region from the Caribbean and Latin America in this meeting of education ministries in Santiago in Cepal last week. And the topics that were prioritized were the recovery of the financing or funding from education from SUMMA. We supported them in the writing of this statement. And I'm saying this because we have to consider how to evaluate, do we measure the things that we do. How do we measure the learning outcomes of the students, the performance of teachers, the performance of our schools and our educational system as a whole, not with the purpose of blaming or punishing or supervising in this sense of control, but with this, the purpose of support. How can we give more support where it's mainly required, considering that the assessment, the formative assessment is very important in the educational processes. So from SUMMA, this has been very important for us to attend this cycle of webinars focused on evaluation, assessment, and measurement. So in order to complete this, I'm going to present these slides with some topics so we can hear also the other speakers and listen to all the people that is going to participate in these 2 days. It's very important for the ministries, for the recovery, for the transformation, that were the main focus of this meeting with the different ministries of education. The things that we want to cover today is the importance of evaluation, the experiences of institutions specialized in evaluation in Latin American countries, check and review the evolution of evaluations in the region, and also some challenges in the use of these assessments. I want to start with something that we cannot forget, that we should keep in mind. The fact that our region has been highly impacted by COVID. It's a region that was not in terms of development and before pandemic, but now today, after sub-Saharan Africa, it's among the regions with greatest or educational poverty. Almost 80% of children and adolescents at 10, when they are 10, they cannot read a simple phrase or sentence and understand it. So we're talking about a catastrophe for the region. And we must say that with or without pandemic had a very weak educational system, although it was being strengthened. So the question is, how do we recover and how do we transform these educational systems? And I highlight this. This was the main concern and the main agreement of our ministries of education in this meeting that we mentioned before. So now the important is we need to define what's the pedagogical nucleus or core. We have to start improving from that nucleus or from that core that is the interaction among teachers, students, mediated by pedagogical practices in relation to content. So it's related to what we want, what do we want, what is it that we want the students to learn? That's the curriculum. That is something complex in all societies. So we need to define what the societies in the future should know or should learn. Second, after that question, what? The question is how we are going to teach that. And we know this is not like a piece of cake, but we have seen that this is, it's not that any practice works, but we should consider the practice that has an evidence that will create an impact in the learning. We know that we cannot ask teachers to do more, but we need to ask them to do better things because they have given everything in this pandemic and post-pandemic for the recovery of the learning processes in terms of their working hours at home and at school. But what we want is to focus in how we can do this with practices such as metacognition and the collaborative learning, and also the formative feedback, which are things that have an effect, an impact, that are humanizing practices. We're not talking about technology, we're not talking about AI, we're talking about these practices of better performance and a better impact in the learning process. In order to know if they have an effect, it's not that we define well the how and what to teach, but we need to know how much of that learning and how deep it is. When we talk about deep learning or when we talk about sense learning that makes sense. So it's important to know this summative or accumulative evaluation, but the formative evaluation. We have to perform this pedagogical nucleus with the families, or we have to encourage it with the professors, with teachers, with the structural supports, institutional supports, enabling conditions. But in the center or in the middle of everything, we should have the learning of children and adolescents, boys and girls. We have to be focused on inclusion and equity. And this is important for the assessment. It has to be inclusive, not only from the instruments that are used for a test, but in the point number 20, that it has to be inclusive, that it eliminates biases in how to establish the questions or how to make the questions, that they are not biased by gender or not biased in the language used, that excludes children with lower income environments. The tests sometimes are performed with languages that are part of the language of the elites. Or so the question is, are we measuring what we want to measure, or are we measuring the social capital or the cultural capital of children beyond the things that we want to evaluate? So these equitative and inclusive dimensions should also be in the heart of the evaluation. So our evaluations or assessments are free of bias, of gender bias, that they are free of these socioeconomic biases. So what are the challenges in the use of assessments for our systems? First, in a macro level, the assessment, something that hasn't been done in most of our countries, evaluations are mainly for like a control mechanism or punishment mechanism in many cases in the schools, but it's not focused in the orientation or in the support. We need to make that this is a support system in the school management that supports in the information of national policies, that allows us to identify the gaps that are in different groups, urban, rural, gender, socioeconomical level, that allows us to evaluate the effectiveness of policies, plans, and programs. And we have an ethical dimension. We don't know, we cannot boost or encourage those innovations if we don't know if they are going to have an impact in the quality of learning of the youth, because we are wasting resources that are scarce in programs that might sound good, but we don't but do not have the effect that we expect. That's why it's important to measure that effectivity. That's why it's important to have a strategy of accountability of how the situation, the conditions are, and the students that attend these schools. But also assessment has to be used by the directors, by professors or teachers for the definition of remedial measures and improvement plans. It does not only have to be an improvement plan, but it has to improve the analysis process for the improvement. Everything should be focused in that improvement. So this topic is so important, and that we can see that many countries, and it has increased in the last 20 years, there has been an institutionalization, and especially from 2015, we see the institutionalization of evaluation institutes at a national level that are autonomous or semi-autonomous from the Ministry of Education, in order to have a certain neutrality in the evaluation, but also to professionalize and strengthen the evaluation in our countries. I'm going to mention INEVAL in Ecuador, INED in Uruguay, the Quality Agency in Chile, and ICFES in Colombia. We know that there are many countries in which the evaluation function is ruled by the ministries of education, and this is complex because there is no independency of that evaluation. There might be no transparency that is demanded by the citizens in relation to the improvement of the policy's effectivity. In this institutionalization, we see some factors that are the strengths of this institutionalization that are related with a higher autonomy and impartiality of the assessment, that many of these institutions have the financial autonomy to strengthen their sustainability, that go beyond the government. They are as state policy. They are specialized in a function that is quite complex, the creation of items, the correction, all the models of prediction of the scores with these theories that are difficult to operationalize and that require technical support that is very important. Also, there are some other challenges. and that this autonomy does not create lack of coordination with the Ministry of Education, with the things that are evaluated or assessed. That summative assessment per se is not good if it's not for the improvement, if it's not for the support for schools and teachers, and we need to consider that. Also, many of these institutionalization with these evaluation institutes have occurred mainly in the summative evaluation sphere, but we need this. Something that happened during pandemic is that it was extended to the formative field. It's a tool that forms the teacher during the formative process and not at the end of it. But there is also some other fields beyond the traditional disciplines such as maths and language, but also they include the social emotional skills, interpersonal skills. Another important challenge for the region is to keep in mind the technical, or to count with the technical teams that are necessary for this. Many times they are not available in our country, so we need, or we required more capacity building, this greater exchange among countries in order to understand and know the technical experiences and the technical work in this sense. Also, this part about the focus not in the institution but in the tests. What we have seen in the region is that we have a strong emphasis in mathematics, language, and science. That is, it has a reason, or there is a reason why this happens, because we know that language, according to the last PISA test, 50% of the 15-year-old students are not capable of reading and understanding a paragraph. They do not have the basic skills in terms of reading. And for maths, this is more or less 70%, 75% of the students. So the focus in maths and in language, it's an ethical task, something basic that we cannot widen in other topics if we don't solve the first part. Because here we see students that are functional illiterate in language and in maths, and their life is going to be impacted, and as a citizen. So these are the pillars of a healthy citizenship. But nonetheless, it's important to see also the social emotional skills of civic and citizenship training. And there has been an effort in the national evaluations, assessments, and in the region to include these type of evaluations. And also they have opened this provision of formative assessments, diagnosis assessments, so schools may focus their work. I'm not going to go in detail on these topics of more concrete evaluations, but I can tell you that although many of the summative evaluations were suspended. That was interesting because it allowed the formative evaluations or assessments, and now they are more organized from this year. Some of them have some consequences, and we may talk about these consequences that are fair because they allocate the responsibility in the schools according to what should be allocated to them, and that they consider the type of students they have and the conditions in which this pedagogic work is done. Among the summative tests, we see Aprender in Argentina, Saber in Colombia, the national tests. In Costa Rica, these formative tests that they have grown in the last years, we can highlight the DIA test in Chile, Conociendo mis logros in El Salvador, or Understanding my achievements. So we see these type of tests in the region that have become institutionalized. It's important to mention that in some cases, such as in SIMSE Chile, this is like a census test, and the other one is like a sample test. And as this is like a census, we see the result at the school level. We can see if that school, how their students are performing, while the sample one, it's cheaper, it's easier in logistical terms, but it loses its that capacity. So when these tests are focused in their resources, in the support to the system, we prefer to see the census test more than sample tests. If we only want to have like a measurement of how things are working, then we just have a sample, such as the PISA tests that are international tests. And also we see this annual test, such as Avanzo in El Salvador, that is at the end of the secondary school, at the end of the educational cycle. And while there are others, such as Aristas tests, that are implemented every 3 years in Uruguay. Some of these tests or assessments are in primary school, secondary school. It changes according to the country. And to close my presentation, I want to tell you that besides the institutionalization as a macro process in the region, besides the agency and its corresponding tests, we also have another process that is quite interesting, that is the participation of our region in international tests at regional and at global level. And I will tell you this evolution about this. First, what we see at a global level is the participation of our region in tests such as TIMSS or PISA in relation to knowledge and in reading, mathematics, and science. They are the traditional skills, but also what is interesting, and we have some other guests, such as ACER, that we have the focus in the non-traditional skills, such as citizenship and technological skills. So the region is exposed, is willing to make their results transparent and being part of these tests, and also see their gaps in these fields. Here, I just want to show you that this comes even before 1995, but we are taking the last 30 years. But you can go even before these years that we can see some tests taken at a regional level, but with very, very small samples. But if you see the photo itself, you will see that there have been more countries interested in these topics. They have considered the PISA test, the ICS, and about citizenship topics, and we see this until 2023, and we see how that are they are part of the so we see the change, the agenda that we have for the next years: PISA 2025, PIRLS 2026, 27, and 25. And we miss the Caribbean region in PISA tests, in X tests, but the Caribbean region also has their own regional tests. I'm not going to stop here, but we see that the region showed improvement. Some countries, for example, Peru, was increasing its results, and in some other cases, we see a next stagnation in this situation. Also, we have seen they have lost some capacities, but we see that in Latin America, many countries go from 2, 3, 4, 5 years of delay in reading in relation to OECD countries. We are delayed or behind between 3 to 5 years in comparison with the OECD countries. Our children are suffering from very poor results in their learning process. These are the PISA results under the level 2 in reading. We are talking about 50% or above 55%, and in the mathematics case, we are talking almost 75% below level 2, which is the minimum level by the OECD. And the region has made a great effort, and I want to highlight of YESE from UNESCO and through the lab. And in the ERSE case, we have seen more countries that are incorporated different subjects. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to show the results. I want to tell you that the Caribbean has also been working in as a region in different tests of different fields to strengthen their work in this area. So to finalize my presentation, I want to highlight this, that we have more evaluations in the region in terms of fundamental tests and moving towards social-emotional skills and citizenship items. There has been a balance in the census parts or areas, because that would allow us to know the schools that are with problems and that require more support. And also, there has been a better balance or a better result, and maybe it's a challenge as well for the formative or favoring the formative tests. So hopefully we can have more tools so professors and teachers may focus their daily activities with the students. And also there has been an increment in the participation in regional studies and international studies. And I think that's important because it allows us to compare ourselves. It's not only about knowing if we are improving, but that's important, but it's important to know how we are in comparison to other countries and regions, because it allows us to learn. We learn from our mistakes, we learn from the common gaps. We don't have model countries neither in Latin America or in the world, but there are learnings, lections that we will find out and what we will understand and contextualize. There have been some movements that are more consequence there are more consequences, and these consequences in terms of the support, that depending on the type of result of the evaluations, the schools and their teachers receive more support and not only like punishments. We want to highlight a policy that is the preferential solution that allows us to classify the schools according to their performance based on the students, the resources, and from them, tests and evaluations want to be a mechanism for the support and implementation of educational improvement programs. Thank you so much. We have seen or we have been in a very long path in our region, a very complex road and this has sometimes it has had negative consequences when this is badly used. This is for the creation of rankings. It may have consequences in the school in terms of punishment, and those are the bad effects and uses that we give to the evaluation. And as the evaluation can be used in a proper way, in a way that we can define how do we distribute the resources and how do we support our teachers for the educational improvement. Thank you so much, and welcome to all the speakers and the audience that is here with us. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a Javier por esa.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you for that presentation. And I just want to highlight what you mentioned at the beginning. Maybe those questions that we should ask ourselves is, what can we do for the assessment to be in order to improve, for supporting, and not to punish or controlling? So what we should observe and wonder is if those are assessments, evaluations which are inclusive in terms of equity is a core element, and what we have here are the models, but these are learnings. So thank you very much, Javier. So now we're going to start. I want to introduce Dr. Wolfgang Schultz. He holds a degree in political science from the Free University of Berlin, and he's a PhD from University of Rostock. He's a senior researcher of the Australian Council for Educational Research. He has been the director for the first 3 cycles of IEA's International Civic and Citizenship Education Study in 2009, 2016, and 2022. He was also coordinating the development and analysis of questionnaires for PISA 2003 and 2006, and the International Computer and Information Literacy Study in 2013 and 2018. He is a senior survey consultant for many other studies conducted by ACER. Dr. Schultz has extensive experience in leading large-scale national and international assessment programs. And he also provides technical advice to ACER study project managers. He is the author of numerous research reports and enjoys a high academic credibility amongst experts in the field of investigational comparative research, survey sampling, and large-scale evaluation methodology. Dr. Wolfgang, it is an honor for us to have you here. The floor is all yours. Thank you, Rosa. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Excellent, then. So give me just 1 second.
Okay. Yeah. Buenos días a todos.
It is good morning, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I was asked to make the presentation in English, so I will now switch languages. Neither one is actually my native language, but I will not torture you with German. Also, I don't think you're prepared for that. So we'll talk a little bit about the International Civic and Citizenship study. The IEA has been commissioned since with the first implementation in 2009, and with a particular focus on how it has been implemented in the Latin American region and what kind of challenges we have encountered, and also a few results. Of course, there's not much time to go into any details, but I'll give you an overview of how ICCS has been implemented, and in particular also in the Latin American region. Unfortunately, in the Caribbean region, we haven't been as successful in having countries except for the Dominican Republic. So what are the aims and purposes? So we want to know how young people are prepared to later become citizens, and what is the role of education in doing that. So what it allows, if countries participate in this study, is to monitor trends in terms of how much students know, in terms of knowledge about and understanding of civic and citizenship issues, their attitudes, and also things related to the engagement. Over time, you can then, now we have a 3rd cycle, so basically between 2009 and 2022, this can be monitored for those countries that have participated. It also captures things that are important to understand the outcomes of learning in this learning area. So we have contextual information from at the level of an education system, for example, schools, classrooms, and home. And this is not a learning area that is as mathematics or science. It is certainly something that is very much less curriculum driven. It is curriculum driven, but more and more the focus is on the whole school approach, to see that the whole and how everyone basically contributes to educating young people for citizenship. And of course, things change in terms of the general context of democracy, of civic participation. And therefore, for each new cycle, we have been developing new focus areas. So monitor things that remain the same, but also add new content and looking at that. The background is a bit that there has been a very long tradition of IEA studies. So IEA is an organization doing all kinds of studies. For math and science, it's TIMSS. For reading, it's PIRLS. For ICLS, looks after information and computer literacy. And ICCS is concerned with citizenship education. And it started very early. I was still at school in those days, and many were probably not even here yet, which was the first study in 1971 with only 10 countries participating. And then the first larger study was in 1999, that was CIVET. And since 2009, ICCS has been implemented, and we at the Australian Council for Educational Research, ACR, we have been doing, looking after the International Studies Center for this study. If we look at the participation in the Latin American region, so in CIVET, we had Chile and Colombia. In ICCS 2009, we had 6 countries. We added Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Mexico, and Paraguay. We had a bit of a change with 2016 because 2 countries dropped out and Peru came in. But unfortunately, 2022, only Brazil and Colombia managed to implement the main data collection. There was a dropout basically of 3 to 4 countries that were very interested at the beginning, but then for different reasons has dropped out. And this is maybe already flagging one of the problems that we have, the consistency in terms of participation, in particular in this region. Related to that, I'll show you a little map. These are countries that have participated, the blue ones, in our study, and others that have participated before. And what we can see is that most of the participation, fortunately, unfortunately, it's good for Europe that we have so many we've had so many countries and so much interest there. But of course, we are missing a lot. In Africa and Asia, there's scarce participation. This is one thing about the national studies. It's never everyone participates, and there are different reasons for that. And then, of course, civic and citizenship education has been not as a center of interest or resources. Usually it's key subjects like mathematics and reading, and also science. So this has always been a bit of a struggle to convince countries to come in and participate in this country, in this study. So what are we actually doing in this study? So first of all, we want to know how is civic and citizenship education implemented in participating countries. You can easily imagine there's quite a range of different approaches to that. We also want to know what's actually the extent of how much students actually know if you look across different national contexts. We want to also know what's the extent of students' engagement, and it's not only the engagement at school and the community, which is of course a bit also limited by the age group, because we have students in the 8th grade of students schooling, but also in terms of what are they planning to do in the future, and then we want to know which factors are actually related to that. We also take into consideration what students believe, so important issues in terms of equal rights and opportunities, for example, environmental protection, what do they actually believe, what a good citizenship should be about, and also things related to their political systems and their institutions. And then also we look at how is actually schooling organized to prepare students for citizenship, and how is that actually related to what we find in the data. So in terms of are there any connections between how and what they have done at school in terms of civic engagement and later on. I talked already about focus areas. So for 2022, we looked at environmental sustainability, at engagement with digital technologies, at diversity and broader form. So of course, first of all, and especially in European and North American countries, you think about migration, and increasingly also in Latin America, but it also is about gender diversity, socioeconomic differences, and how actually schools deal with these issues. And then there has been observation of a growing instability of political systems and alienation of citizens from society, from the system, from democratic processes. And so that was another thing we looked at. And last not least, global citizenship issues were also seen as important and received more recognition as in previous cycles. So we have a design for that. The only change now is that we have introduced computer-based assessment, which was done by 2/3 of the countries, but will be the sole mode of delivery in any future implementation. We had different instruments, a student test, a rotated booklet design, student questionnaire, but we also ask teachers about things that happen at school and how they see citizenship education. The school questionnaire, we have also national centers provide us with data about national context, and we also, and this is unique to the study, is a regional student questionnaire. We had ones for Europe and for Latin America, which in the past have also been connected with reports on the region. In terms of how do we get our data, we have representative samples, as in other studies like TIMSS, PISA. So we select schools proportion by size, and then have classrooms of students in the 8 years of schooling who are then responding to the test questions and the questionnaires. And we always keep some material so that we can look at changes from one cycle to the next. I want to tell you about some results. There is a little problem here because in 22, I already mentioned, only 2 countries participated. So most of what concerns Latin America will take from 2016. So we can't really, when it comes to the region, we can't really have very good data. They come only from 2 countries, and also Brazil unfortunately had some problems with their response rates, so we have to take their data also with a little bit of caution. But so I'll try to give you a few insights on what we found, and then at the end, after that, I will talk a little bit about the general challenges. So with regard to the Latin American region, what we found is that there's a lot of impact on historical and social context, on how their curricula shaped in terms of civic and citizenship education. We also found some things like Mexico and Peru were actually the ones that had a specific subjects for this learning area. In Dominican Republic, it was only until 2015, and then it was integrated more into other areas. This is actually what almost the majority of country probably tends to do anyway. An interesting aspect was related to elections and voting. That was, for example, not included in the curricula of 2 of those countries, which caught a bit our attention. And only in Mexico we had an explicit reference at the time. Things can also have changed to voting as a right and obligations for citizenship. So all this already hints at there is quite a bit of variation across countries in terms of how civic and citizenship are basically implemented in these countries. When we looked in 2016, and I'm taking this because we had 5 countries participating, and we look at these infamous ranking tables. We always say they are not the most important part, and this is actually more to show how much variation there is. And so we can see that basically there are these quite a lot of variation across countries, and in Latin American countries, unfortunately, civic knowledge and understanding was much lower than in many European countries, for example, or also in Taiwan. But what we also see is there's a lot of variation within countries, and that is also to see. And actually, the variation within countries is actually larger than the variation between countries. And what this actually tells you that even in countries where on average you might think they know more, there's still quite substantial gaps. This is a corresponding thing for 2022. And here, unfortunately, in this main table, we only could include the Colombian data, and that was very much similar to what we found in the previous cycle. So what we find is, of course, there are quite a lot of differences across countries in terms of civic knowledge, but we also, and this is one of the things about ICCS, we look much more than other countries at other things that are usually measured with questionnaires. For example, about civic engagement. So young people tend to value student participation, particularly in Latin America. That was one finding from 2016. And when it comes to asking them, will you vote in elections, local election, national election, or get information? Most of them actually still believe they will do that. And this went a little bit down in 2022 overall, but it's still, vast majority still think they are going to vote. However, there are also other things to consider. For example, in particular in Latin American countries, and mind you, I'm talking about the 5 that participated in 2016. And of course, that's not all of Latin America. But what we found was there was a bit of a difference when you ask about what's good for democracy or bad for democracy, that in fact, there were 30% that thought that giving jobs to family member was a good thing in terms of for a democracy, which was much less in other countries. We also found high proportions of students endorsing gender equality, but relatively a little bit lower in some of our Latin American participants. And one interesting thing, and this includes also 22 data, there's an increasing support for same-sex marriage in young people. So this comes from our Latin American regional questionnaire, where this question was included. So, for example, in Colombia, it went up from 49% in 2009 to 80%. And between 2009 and 2016, we had similar increases. A few more things from the 2016 assessment, because there we had several countries. So when you ask them about justifying dictatorships, you found that there was quite a number of students who actually thought that they were justified. We found that there was quite a bit of understanding for example, that a public servant would help friends to find some work in their offices. And one of the main things was also that we found that all of these were very strongly associated with civic knowledge. So those with higher civic knowledge were less inclined to be in favor of more authoritarian government practices or understanding of corruption and so forth, which kind of goes into the direction to say that, well, civic education and learning about it does make a difference also when it comes to the development of attitudes. The implications that we had from our results were basically generally that there was some limits to the commitment to democracy across Latin American countries amongst the students. these are results quite similar to some of the adult surveys that that there were at the same time. And also there was a little bit higher acceptance of authoritarian government practices, especially I showed you support for justifications of dictatorship and also an acceptance of corrupt practices in government. And generally, we found that civic knowledge was always associated with these things. So the more knowledge they had, the less were they inclined to accept, for example, corruption and things like that. We found also there are quite a lot of gaps in terms of the acquisition of civic knowledge. So we had a bit of an increase between 2009 and 2016, but in those countries that were there in 2022, it went down again, which of course is, we can speculate about the impact of the pandemic. And a few more things about the challenges that we found. So generally, I think there was a widespread interest in this learning area, but there was also a lack of consistency regarding country commitment, which is basically can be seen in terms of that we lost quite a little bit of footing in the region with ICCS 22. One of the factors, of course, is funding always in Europe, for example, the European Commission is funding country participation. We had that in Latin America only in 2009. That, of course, is a great motivator for country participation because funds are very often scarce, especially for evaluation. We found a bit of a lack of independent valuation agents. Experience training. In 2009, we could actually provide that as part of our study, which was very well received. And then, of course, government changes, funding issues, and all kinds of political social development impact the decision making. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic also had some impact on this. And another thing is we often in our international studies, we build our instruments toward the level of those studies that are the majority. So basically, when you have a very, where in countries where students actually have very low reading ability, then basically our instruments do not work and measure that well. We have also found that there was a visible dropout of students with lower levels of civic knowledge at the end of our instruments for tests and questionnaires. Also lower scalar abilities and even implausible findings may sometimes could sometimes be one thing. And I think at the end, there's a need to consider how to improve measurement in countries with vastly different levels of student knowledge in general, which is also starts with reading abilities. You have to read well to read these instruments. And of course, things like regional studies or modules could be one way of addressing this. We did it a little bit with our regional questionnaire, but of course, there might be other ideas, and adaptive testing, for example, is something that's very often discussed, but not yet not as much implemented yet. And of course, that's still something to think about. And especially, I think for the Latin American region, it might be very important to think about how to target things much better and also take up region-specific issues in these studies. And with that, thank you. Muchas gracias. Merci bien.
Muchísimas gracias, Dr. Wolfgang. Creo
Thank you,
que
Doctor. I believe that it is really interesting how there is a high commitment of all of these countries. We could see this in your presentation, the impact of the pandemics, political changes. We really thank you. We really thank you for your presentation. So once again, thank you very much for being with us this morning. So now we're going to have the presentation of Referee Gordon and Royston Emmanuel. Referee Gordon is the project manager in the Educational Development Management Unit of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS. And she's a specialist in e-learning. She's a institutional technologist in the educational area. So we want to thank Ogde accompanying us this morning. And the floor is all yours.
Royston, ¿estás aquí con nosotros? Pues,
Royston,
I'm
the
sorry.
floor is yours.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was still muted. I'm sorry. So good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for inviting us to share on some of the developments when it comes to assessments within the OECS region. And in as much as this presentation is supposed to focus on challenges, we want to look at the positive side of all of this. And so we really want to look at how we address those challenges, how we transition those challenges into some positive outcomes. And so we'll be giving a specific country example. So let's just talk briefly about what we see as challenges from the different activities taking place within the OECS. And our challenges can just be itemized as challenges to data, ownership, decision-making, and resources. Truly within our context, we need to strengthen the collection and the use of data. Definitely when it comes to ownership, we need greater ownership of our assessment approaches, strategies, our assessment materials, and definitely that assessment needs to have more cultural relevance. And of course, those assessments there needs to be a strong connection between those assessments and decision making. So these assessments need to inform clear education policy and interventions within our schools. What people believe is our greatest challenge is, of course, resources. And definitely there are limitations when it comes to how we can differentiate assessments because of the modalities we use, and all of these, of course, are really a consequence of the inadequacy of resources. But that being said, we don't want to simply focus on the challenges. What we need to look at is how innovations within our context are supporting policy that help to engender an education system that supports four key tenets. And one is equity, the other is inclusion, the other is empowerment, and the other is agency. And these can be linked to students, teachers, our citizens, because all of these are critical stakeholders within the education system. So when we look at innovation, we need to talk a lot about how we now are addressing or approaching data. What are the data collection tools, methods, principles, approaches that we are using? So the OECS has done quite a bit when it comes to collecting early learning assessment data, early reading data, and even now we are working on an approach to assessment and assessment tools that will collect data on that will collect early reading assessment data and early mathematics assessment data. And of course, these are to be treated not just as summative instruments, but also as instruments that inform educational interventions and interventions specific to the child. And of course, that data will contribute to the development of a regional education management information system. And this is critical to the region because that EMIS will support the goals of regional integration, free movement across the OECS, that ability of an OECS citizen to transition from school to school, from education system to education system, and of course, to access job opportunities within the different OECS countries. But in order to make all of this happen, we need to focus on standards. And so we are doing a lot of work when it comes to the development of learning standards. So presently, the OECS Pearl has developed core standards for critical subject areas: mathematics, language arts, social studies, science. And these standards have been articulated as essential outcomes, and this supports the development of a very robust curriculum that that will be implemented across the OECS. When it comes to standards, we also have a strong emphasis on performance assessment. So it's no longer assessment for this just to determine whether students know material, but we need to understand the application, that application of understanding, of knowing, into practical approaches, activities that can transform our societies and our communities. But for all of this to happen, we need strong alignment between the data, the policy, teaching and learning practices, teacher professional development. So, and we have been doing a lot of work when it comes to that. So we advocate for policy. We work on the development of frameworks that support policy building within the different national countries of the OECS. We also mobilize teams, and specific to assessment, we have mobilized assessment teams to support the development of regional assessments, especially the early reading assessment and the early mathematics assessment. We are also supporting the acquisition of resources for different member states. So the early reading assessment and early mathematics assessment will be administered in a digital format, which means that countries have a dire need for tools, for technologies to support that. And so we, through our donor agencies, are supporting the acquisition of those tools and devices for the region. So, but, let's move to a more practical example. And I want to use, this use case. This is the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And they are a model of how innovation in assessment can actually help address a lot of the challenges with assessment. So St. Vincent and the Grenadines were part of the early learners program, which started as early as 2016 in the OECS. That program introduced a method, an approach to early reading assessment that was electronic. So countries were given the opportunity to adopt this approach. It was piloted, but St. Vincent and the Grenadines took it one step further. So they looked at the affordances of this approach and decided to make that shift from a paper-based to electronic assessment. Now that shift is not simply a shift in modality for collecting the data, but it's also a shift in the ideology behind the data collection, the use of the data, the application of the data, and of course the fact that it creates a space where the data is accessible, usable, and can inform really sound decision making. So St. Vincent and the Grenadines worked with their teams to develop teacher capacity. So they came up with innovative practices like peer review. So as teachers developed items for assessment, these were reviewed by fellow teachers. And so there was a process of that validation that would more or less result in the item being accepted, considered valid, and included in the assessments. And that's extremely important because it actually supports the concept of co-creation, which is about empowerment within the education system. And so that the fact that teachers are involved in not just the development of items, but of course the review of items means that they are more in tune with the assessment, and the assessments are more connected to what they're doing in the classroom. St. Vincent also provided continuous training for teachers in the implementation of those assessments. But importantly too, St. Vincent realized that this is not something that they could have done on their own. So they collaborated with St. Lucia's Ministry of Education, and our ministry provided support in the form of a server to host that data. And so that actually answered some critical issues when it came to data sovereignty and data security, and data ownership basically. And so that data resides within the region and can be accessed by key stakeholders in the region. So that data collection resulted in the development of a mini EMIS, which serves as an access point for initial student data. So what St. Vincent now knows is that they have the demographics of their student population in a location that they can easily access, and that supports very sound decision making. But ultimately, for St. Vincent, this process, as it was reiterated, became more cost-effective and responsive, and so it became the way of ensuring that those early reading assessments were completed. So what does it have to do? What does the model have to do with innovation and addressing those critical challenges in assessment for our region? So to the right of the screen, we have the immediate benefits to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There was improved data collection, definitely data sovereignty. There was an ease of reporting because the data could be accessed in formats that allowed for analysis and all of those things. Obviously, reduced costs, and all of this, added value to everything that was happening and supported, the ease of decision making. But on a more global scale, these affordances more or less supported some of the critical, principles, considerations when it comes to assessment within the region. So one of the key considerations is accuracy, reducing the possibility of human error. But at the same time, equity is also important because it's a central principle when it comes to access, that not only teachers can access the assessments, the data, etc., but that students who student assessment can be differentiated and can respond to the learner. Also, there is fairness because it does remove a lot of the biases, of manually implemented assessment, and of course, it supported inclusivity. And more importantly, the fact that this supported co-creation means that teachers are taking ownership of those assessment practices and that assessment data and can easily respond to that data, accept that data because it's a representation of their context and their understanding of what is happening in their education system. So for us, before I move on to the way forward, there are other innovations that we are more or less adopting within the OECS. One of the critical ones is creating an enabling environment for transformative assessment approaches. So we have moved to the point where we are embracing micro-credentialing, stackable credentials, professional certification, and we are developing a supporting context, a supporting environment with the necessary mechanisms to accept those approaches. So for us, the way forward for us now, definitely, when it comes to addressing the challenges that this presentation started with, we need to build on the approaches, those innovative approaches of our member states, so St. Vincent being one of them, to further enhance data collection and responsiveness. But it also means that understanding the benefits and the affordances of all of these means that we need to reshape policies. Reshape policies at the regional level, but advocate for our member states to look at their policies and more or less revisit their policies so that the policies can articulate a more inclusive approach to assessments. But as a region and as a regional organization, we are also working on the enhancement of our national regional assessments. So case in point, we are working with CXC. We have an understanding with CXC to work on the primary exit exams, CPEA, in a way that can support the contextualization of those exams to meet the needs of our learners. Okay, and that is the advantage of economies of scale that we represent. We and that kind of advocacy can prove quite useful in changing the approaches of other organizations to assessments within our region. And definitely capacity building, we are doing a lot of this. So we have developed a MyPD platform, a professional development platform for teachers. And we have worked and are working with consultants to offer quality professional development, certified and credentialed professional development for our teachers. So with that, I want to thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Agradecemos al equipo.
Thank you so much to Royston and Raven for this presentation. We think it's very important to start with these challenges and how these challenges are connected to the decision making. And thank you for sharing with us the example of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and showing us these key topics: co-creation, early evaluation or early assessment, how these changes in the application and its use are making an impact in the decision making. We think that's really valuable. Thank you to all our colleagues from OECS. Today, I would like to share some of the observations that I've heard from the academic world. And we have invited today to Nancy Montes. Nancy is a sociologist, a specialist in social and demographic indicators from the University of Buenos Aires. She's got a master's degree in education from Flaxo, Argentina. She's a teacher and researcher in the education area at Flaxo, a specialist at OEI, and has been a consultant for the ITV, UNICEF, IIEP, UNESCO, and ORELC. Thank you, Nancy, for being here with us. The floor is yours. Thank you, Rosa, for the invitation. Well, good morning, everybody. I want to share with you my screen. Then you will access the presentation. I would like to share with you the results of a study that was done in UNESCO in the offices in Buenos Aires for Latin America and the Caribbean, a study coordinated by Daniel Vincas, and I was responsible for organizing this national report for Argentina that we had in we worked in six countries, and we had this compared analysis, and then I will share with you a comment about the presentations that came before me. This study was focused in the use of the results of the evaluations in large scale for the planning of educational policies. We worked with 6 countries, 3 of the federal governments, such as Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and 3 that are centralized countries, such as Chile, Ecuador, and Uruguay. We want to share with you the link so you can have access to, or you can access those studies, and also a short article about this regional forum. And the idea of this webinar is to share this empiric evidence of studies that have these subjects as an object. The idea was to analyze the relationship between the uses of results of the foreseen learning assessment operations in the legal frameworks and in the design of the devices. That's why we use the prescribed uses and the effective uses that are done or that are proven that for the design and implementation of the policies. The idea of this is to create knowledge that gives us a higher use of the potential of these devices or instruments for the design of educational policies in the region. And also, the work is about the factors that explain the types of use or their absence. And we think that these are interesting elements for the focus of this meeting, as they are opportunities and challenges that we have to consider. In recent studies that we had between August and December 2021, beginning of 2022, this was 5 years before we analyzed the national operations of these 6 countries between 2016 and 19, also the results of this regional assessment, ERSE, and PISA 2018. What was the reference corpus of this work besides analyzing documents, regulations, and websites of each one of the countries? We had different interviews to politicians, to people in charge of the planning, representatives of unions, specialists, and organizations from the civil society. We had interviews with 120 people in group or individual interviews. I want to share with you some of the identified uses in some of the countries. Some of them were mentioned by the presentation held by Javier. We had 4 types of uses that we see in all the countries to planify intervention strategies in different levels of the system based on a diagnosis use of the results and the related factors, developing policies and support programs, universal or focused for the results improvement. In 6 countries, we identified the need of focusing the curriculum and the creation of pedagogic materials. That is something frequent, and also strengthening the teachers' professionalization or development. Only in 3 countries, we identified the use of selection tests for accessing higher tertiary education, and in other 3 countries, Chile, Brazil, and Mexico, the existence, the evaluation to professors or teachers, and also use related to organizing or ordering these rankings according to the performance reached. In order to analyze the uses, we wanted to check another literature from other colleagues that have checked these topics, and something that was highlighted by Javier, the need to make a difference if we are using this in a relative way in relation to the macro level in terms of the ministry and also to the micro level. We think that's important because it allows us to establish, that was something that Royston mentioned, what is this for, or who is this destined to, or in the educational systems. Callahan talks about the need to inform the policy. Arregui shows the importance of evaluating the impact of the programs, defining a political agenda. Many countries include the results or the goals in their strategic plans in the long term, also reporting different exercises in different levels of the planning system. And what Galas Taboada mentions, that is talking about the micro level, it states a possibility to design support programs or selecting schools or group of students to have specific interventions with them, or directing these efforts to improve the performance and the achievement of the students. There is an interesting scheme to show you to think about the factors that intervene to enable or not to enable the effective uses. We also had previous presentations that mentioned the political factors, the existence of national plans of assessment, institutional factors, the existence of specialized agencies or institutions that are part of the ministries of education areas that are stabilized in most of the countries, technical factors that are related to the capacities of those that are working in those fields, to the human resources that are available, but also specific aspects of each one of the tests or evaluations implemented, and other dimensions that we think it's important to mention in this part that is about feedback of these factors, and is if we have a definition of the users, and that's why it is important to highlight them to make a difference between the different scales or levels and how to access the results, as Royston mentioned, with these things about communication for students, for the families, for the schools, or for allowing the analysis of the interventions. Some of the main conclusions of our study in relation to the regulatory frameworks, which are the education laws or the strategic plan, the evaluation, the standardized evaluation or assessments are an available instrument for the decision making and for the improvement in the learning process. In the words of Pincas, they integrate the tools of the state organisms to have these functions of governance of the institutional space, and also the institutional design that organizes these areas, that considers the consolidated structures in the ministry with the different budgets and with different profiles that are recognized. An important characteristic is that the trajectory of application of these tests in relation to the type of evaluations and their uses had some advantages and disadvantages, that we could identify different consequences related to the results, while in others they see low incidence uses. If we see the regulation frameworks that talk about an integrated idea of evaluation, there has been the bias of the implementation of tests. As Wolfram mentioned before, they are mainly related to traditional aspects. Only a third of the countries had only participated in different type of evaluations, although in the last years they continue to incorporate other dimensions to be evaluated. According to the opinion of those that we interviewed, especially about the supranational evaluations, they value that these are an important benchmark measure, and in time they will allow an analysis, or although they have the limitation of not enabling policy decisions, given the report that we have shown about the appointed topics, and also the limitation of the samples limitation, as they mentioned before, if they are censal or by sample, there is a limitation to access the information of the schools and students. According to Patricia, the results of these evaluations are used more than we expect, something that raised a concern when we started this study, and that we are still, and that is still analyzing these strategies of the states. And last, to close my presentation, I think it's important to highlight, when I heard my colleagues, the performative character of the assessments. That is something that we have to analyze as well, in particular when they try to incorporate technological aspects and technological devices that maybe do not cover some areas, and also the use of those technologies, enable the use of these technologies in the different schools and for the different students.
Muchísimas gracias, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Llegar a temas importantes como
We're happy that you have covered these topics such as the results and uses and those goals that the research has in order to assess evaluations. It really got my attention, this topic related to, for some, it's been defining policies or guiding the syllabus curriculum itself or strengthening professors and teachers on setting some pedagogical practices or selecting schools or just to improve those national plans. So we believe that this is really important as an evidence. So now we have Mariela Celada from the, she's got a license research and curriculum from Del Valle University in Guatemala. She also has a bachelor's degree of educational from Illinois University in Chicago. She has been a consultant from SUMMA KXLACT, the first research of development and laboratory in the world. She also for the AIR, she was regional director of Central America and the Caribbean. She's currently coordinator of programs and projects of the Organization of Ibero-American States, OAI, in Guatemala. Thank you very much, Mariela, for being here with us. The floor is yours. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure for me to be here in order to learn and listen into all of these experiences. So right now, in these 10 minutes, I'd like to talk about two of the questions that you mentioned at the beginning, which are related to how these strategies of assessment can contribute for the development of policies pro-equality and focalization strategies, and how these strategies of assessment can also contribute for designing from training systems and strengthening capabilities for teachers. Maybe I also want to talk about one experience that from OAI and with this Pestalozzi Foundation we're having in the Guatemala region, where we're working with multi-grade schools in a department of the eastern side of the country. In the Guatemala context, these multi-grade schools are around 60% of the schools, which serve most of students of the country, because it is not an educational modality which is going to disappear overnight, but this is an educational modality with many challenges because of all of the conditions that it has, and also because there is no, at a structural level, at the Ministry of Education, there is no entity guiding, articulating, or developing material curriculum, syllabus, or some other educational resources for these multi-grade schools. And they are still using all of the ones which have been designed for other type of schools. So in that sense, our intervention, it is concentrated in the writing skills, knowing, as Javier said, that there are, knowing how to write and read and mathematics sets a different way of getting citizenship. And what Wolfram mentioned, it is true, because there is a different way of executing citizenship when you know how to read and write. So in that sense, something important and is also relevant, it is that in this pilot experience that we developed last year, we used this assessment from the evidence that was given by the assessment by the Ministry of Education. They had a sample evaluation and a census for the one we're dating. And for this assessment, which is a sample one, we could have a general viewpoint on the third level the third grade students level was. So we developed, considering EGRA, an assessment that we use for schools, multi-grade schools, which allowed us to have a view centered on how students are in the schools, what they know or what they don't know, how their skills are developed in terms of writing and reading. So over here, we're concentrating this assessment for equity, and we need to think how we concentrate on assessment that gives us a photograph or radiography, X-rays, for those schools which are multi-grade schools, which our implementation was going to be developed. So from these results, not only we could return information to those schools, but also this information allowed us to create some inputs in order to develop a program for training for teachers, which had two main purposes. One, the assessment could allowed us to realize from indicators that students should ideally be here, but in the evidence, local evidence that we gather with this assessment tells us that they're over here. So from here, we could develop this training program not only for supporting teachers to develop their capacities, capabilities to improve the teaching of writing and reading, but also to tell us how we can take students from the level they are at to the level they should be. What scaffolding or resources we need so teachers should learn and use in order to move and in order to take these students from one level to another, to the next level, or the level they should be at. And in that sense, I also want to mention that this assessment also allowed us to learn from this experience, pilot experience. Now, in this implementation, and in the next stage, we can also have in that assessment, diagnostic assessment, we're going to have some initial data that we got from the pilot. So we can say what we have learned from the implementation, what things we could do in the same way, what things we would not do, and what things we're going to do for in terms of adjustments, because for the ones working in projects related to development, these organizations, if we're learning from this assessment, it is something critical. So here, I also want to mention, when we have talked, and Nancy mentioned this, also Javier mentioned this in the experience of the Caribbean, we need to know how this macro and micro level assessment, the debate here, it is not in having one or the other, but how we can connect them, connect these two levels of the assessment, and how we can create a dialogue between macro and micro level assessments. And in that sense, I believe it is really important to think or reflect that for the case of Guatemala, and I also believe that it is for it applies for the region, we need to insist on the importance of having a culture of assessment and accountability at a macro and a micro level. And to do so, this assessment, it is fundamental, because when we talk about a macro system assessment, we also need to think on how the results of these assessments are going to be used at a ministry level and some other stakeholders in the system for this to feed, once again, not only students, their families, and educational institutions, but also some other units such as curriculum, syllabus, text development, training for teachers. So it is a circle, virtuous circle, which the assessment is for the assessment to be used as an input for the system in order to improve educational policies. In that sense, I also believe that it's quite relevant to think on how this micro-level assessment, it is also used for that purpose of creating learning actions, formative actions in different levels in the system, but also which are truly vital. And these pilot experiences, focalized experiences, may create evidence, which is going to allow the systems to replicate and also to scale some other interventions. And here I want to mention and also highlight the importance of having conversations such as this one, events such as this one, where we also, the assessment, need to be assessed. And as Javier said, we need to think about it and we need to reflect on how our politicians, our citizens, educational systems understand assessment and how the students themselves are understanding assessment together with teachers. So the reflection, it is in how these two elements can feed the systems, institutions, and can also create. I've said that in these processes and in education, in all terms, what's important, are not really the answers that we get, but how these processes lead us to create some other questions, which are going to allow us to continue creating this circle between research, evidence, creation of evidence, in order to bridge different elements. So thank you for the invitation, and we're now happy to answer some possible questions you may have. Thank you, Mariela. I just want to highlight two things over here. Beautiful experience in this moving in order to obtain those desired levels. Also, the topic related to working in multi-grade schools, and two reflections that you have also left. We need in the region to develop the culture of assessment and maybe thinking in assessing the assessment. That is also quite interesting. So now, I know there are plenty of questions in the chat box. So we have a segment, we have a Q&A session now. And to do so, I want to invite Mar Botero from Geek Slacks. Thank you, Mar, for helping us with all of this. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of the speakers today. It is true, in the chat box, there are many different questions and many thanks. The most important thing is that we're having the representation from ministries, the academia, having representatives of some international bodies as well. So let's go with our first question it is for Javier. Javier, they're saying there's a challenge and it is really important to distinguish that an assessment, it is not useful in order to report everything. So for me, I'm going to read the question, what Martin is saying. It is hard to think in just one assessment meeting all of the goals which have been set. So how can we, at the same time, be accountable at national level, assessing the impact of the policies, giving some guidelines? Is that possible? Can we go deeper into that? Could you please explain that description and which are the challenges related to that? And we also invite all of the other speakers, panelists. If you have any thought about that, I mean, you're most welcome. Is Javier over here? Maybe he lost his connection. There he is. Yes, I was losing the connection. We're going to repeat the question. So over here, the challenge and the importance of distinguishing that one assessment, it is not useful for reporting any type or all of the types of decisions. So from UNESCO, they're asking, Martin is mentioned the following one. It is hard to think in just one assessment meeting all of these requirements or goals. How can we, at the same time, be accountable at national level, assessing the impact of policies, giving some guidance to schools? And can you please go deeper into that reflection and thought? Yes, I saw that question. I read it, and then later, I don't know, maybe that question was answered in the presentation, but I don't know. Maybe I was not clear enough. Of course, we do need an assessment system which is complex, covering from measures at a system level, school level, and students level. So it is not just one instrument or tool. Most probably, those are going to be many different instruments being required in order to assess policies. There's an impact assessment and results assessment that may use or not some summative tests, or they may require some instruments which are more specific in order to assess a program. Of course, we get shocked when we see this impact assessment, when we see the effect size or the size of the impact. It is bigger when ad hoc instruments are used than when standardized. instruments are used. So what I want to say here is that we need to think properly, which is the goal of the measurement and which is the instrument which is going to be used. Nevertheless, I would say that if you put some pressure on me, clarifying that we require a system of assessment covering different tools and instruments, I would say that if we said, okay, therefore, what is the most important? Where should Latin America advance more? And that's the reason for us to be here. I would say two things. On the one hand, on the summative field, Latin America, as has been shown in my presentation, has advanced a lot in the institutionalization of tests, but we need strengthening standardized tests of a good quality, and by that I mean having some item theory answer, controlling the difficulty of questions, having equating, allowing us what happens from one year to another, so they are comparable. And also, when you have good instruments, some countries are still having some tests of percentages of correct answers, for instance. So therefore, that's not allowed to technically compare these assessments from one year to another. And sometimes these technical searches are not there. So when to improve that quality, those tests, summative tests, and they should be sensible, hopefully in the first cycle, third grade or fourth grade, thinking especially in the needs today of the recovery, and also identifying gaps for writing and reading, and basic skill in mathematics since the very beginning of the system, and not getting too late then. So, and why do I say it should be sensible? Because if there's one field where we are really lagging behind in Latin America, it is truly in using the tests for the improvement and for the distribution of resources at a ministry level. So we need sensible tests allowing us, as I said in my presentation, and this, from SUMMA, we're working with many countries, with many ministers of education in their own countries, in creating some proposals allowing the countries to distribute and allocate resources and supports, not only funds, but also pedagogicals and guidelines, supports for schools over the censal test. So that is the first topic. And sample tests are too low. Some countries are working with that. And also these techniques, metrics, psychometric in the instrument. And secondly, the challenge of test, formative logical tasks during the process of learning, giving the teacher more information in order to see how the students are doing in their classroom. So those are the two fundamental topics which are complementary. Always considering that tasks, the idea is that they should be used for the educational improvement. So it is a battery of instruments. It is not just one instrument.
No sé si alguno de los otros panelistas quiera dar alguna
Thank you.
reflexión sobre
Is there anyone else willing to give an opinion about this? Maybe Dr. Wilhelm? Please, the floor is yours.
Con el tema de prueba censal,
With the census test or having a sample test, well, I have talked about in many other occasions. So I understand that for a formative test, evaluation, I mean, a census test, it is appropriate, but we always need to think about the consequences because, for instance, in Australia, we have one SIMSA test, but it has some risks also. Schools and teachers may feel threatened by that. Politicians sometimes use this in order to say, you know something, we're going to demonstrate teachers that they need to do something and they need to work better. But that is kind of impossible when we have a census task. I understand that for this formative task, we may think of it as an instrument, but in order to know in which direction we should go, I don't really consider it as necessary. I believe that even there are more benefits from a sample test for estimating what happens in a certain population. It is better than a census test because there are many contamination problems because everyone's going to receive the same schools, and there's some effect over the school as well. And we have so many regulations in all of the countries, so the schools are having so much pressure. So I believe that Mariela said it well. We need to assess the assessment, and we need to try not to go with the flow. And in Chile, for instance, there are so many different assessments. Same situation in Australia, so schools don't really want more. So we need to find a way of having, let's say, one rational measurement in order to know which are the benefits of one assessment. Because an assessment just for, if we do an assessment just because, it is not going to help us. So we need to think about that. And when to think about it, because an over-assessment, I mean, we have had it in so many other countries. Thank you, Dr. Wolfer. Mariela, there's a question from your experience in Guatemala. What can you tell us? They are asking, Latin America and the Caribbean, it is a region which is pluricultural with many languages. Nevertheless, during the pandemic, migration is having a strong impact in the loss of languages. So which is the proposal from the assessment, thinking about the quality to promote the teaching and learning of these languages?
Bueno, gracias por la pregunta.
Thank you for that question. Yes, I think there is this important need in how to reflect and take actions about the role of education and school play in this revitalization and use of these originary languages or mother languages. So, but this is also when that shows that we need to continue talking about the bilingual education and the right the students have of receiving that education in their mother tongue, not only using the mother tongue as a communicational instrument in the school, but not as an instruction instrument at school. So I think there is this issue related to evaluation. We are talking about sample and census evaluations, and we are or they are evaluating mathematics, language, reading, and when we are talking about bilingual population, we should ideally develop as countries evaluations in the official languages of the country. And this would also allow us to have an overview of how the bilingual evaluation or bilingual education process is going in the countries, so we can make policy decisions in terms, for example, if materials are needed, if they are actually providing education in the mother tongues, and other decisions that are related or linked to the bilingual education in relation to the evaluation that can be done from it in the different languages. Thank you so much, Mariela. Very interesting what you are mentioning, and this recommendation
También directamente para ti, y es la siguiente. Textualmente, me interesa conocer sobre los usos de la información que recolectan los cuestionarios complementarios. Es una herramienta
by the complementary questionnaires. It's a very powerful tool that is underrated in the analysis about these instruments. Tell us about that, or tell us what you think about this. Thank you for that question. I could say that the use of those questionnaires and the content of those questionnaires in Argentina, that's what I know, they have been helpful, and I understand they have been helpful in other countries to identify some gaps in relation to some dimensions, because they have information about schools and students, and that is one of the purposes, very expensive purposes, given the inequality levels that we have. In pandemic, they were used to identify territories and schools with connectivity problems, and also they could intervene to distribute devices and to resolve that part of the data access. In the questions that were included in some of the evaluations in Argentina about sexual education policies, they helped for the government to not interrupt that type of interventions, because the students considered or stated the need to have more information or receive contents and strategies of work on these topics. But I think this question is also related to what Wolfram mentioned, to talk about the things that the other speakers mentioned. That is the need. I think it's a challenge for the countries of the region of integrating the different types of information, not only the results of the assessments, but also as you can incorporate information of complementary evaluations. As Royston mentioned in his presentation, schools and institutions have a lot of information on the students, their families, also provided by the teachers and the EMIs in the IHER. So there is a lot of data to follow up the trajectory of students and the performance of schools, that I think it's a challenge to integrate, not only to think on the operational results of the evaluation, but also to think, as Javier mentioned, other measurements that are available in education and other indicators. Thank you, Nancy. Also, for the OECS team, they are asking us about the challenges in the articulation that they have with the CXC. They will be here tomorrow. We will have the presentation, and we would like to know from the OECS team what have been the challenges in that articulation, in that work.
So one of the challenges that we have identified is the tendency to devalue assessments that are done by teachers. And so usually assessments that are done at the national level or the regional level have greater levels of confidence. And we are trying to work through the interventions that we have to build confidence in assessments that are conducted by teachers. We first need to recognize that we have to build the capacities of teachers to be able to better conduct those assessments, to make sense of the assessments, and to ensure that we have quality data. And so once we're able to get teachers to an appropriate level of competence, then we need to ensure that the ministries of education in the region enact policies and make decisions that validate those assessments and the results coming from what teachers are able to identify in the classroom. And we believe that this bottom-up approach is very important because it will enable not only the teachers to make real-time decisions about their students, but it would create an accumulation of important information that can go up to the national level and the regional levels so that decision-making is better informed. Teachers are assessing every day. National and regional assessments can only be done at specific times. They come with large amounts of coordination and funding. And so if we can strengthen the assessment mechanism at the classroom level, we believe that we would be in a much better position to make informed decisions. As regards the more standardized assessments, we are pleased that we have formalized our partnership with CXC. And so we've already committed to working with them in revising the primary level assessment that is subscribed to by various OECS member states. And that assessment is going to be aligned to the new curriculum that we're developing that emphasizes digital literacies and new competencies for the world that we live in and the world of tomorrow. So we're confident with the directions that we're taking, informed by those large policy documents that Royston spoke about in the presentation, our curriculum and assessment framework, the Declaration on Education, the OECS Declaration on Education, and the OECS Education Sector Strategy.
Muchas gracias, Rafer. Quiero decirle a todos los participantes que nos han
Thank you so much.
y preguntas en el chat que las estamos sistematizando y mañana esperamos seguir con las preguntas, con las reflexiones, así que también mañana los esperamos en esto. Rosa.
Muchísimas gracias, Mar, y muchísimas gracias a todos los panelistas por su excelente participación y también a la audiencia por haber generado esas preguntas adecuadas. Y para cerrar, quisiéramos invitar a Manuela Pombo, investigadora del KICSLAC, con unas reflexiones de cierre. Gracias, Manuela.
Buenas tardes o días a todos. Mi nombre es Manuela Pombo. Yo soy coordinadora de proyecto de investigación del KICSLAC. Y bueno, como todas han dicho, nuevamente quiero agradecer a nuestros ponentes y a los participantes que nos acompañaron el día de hoy. Hoy estuvimos hablando sobre los diferentes usos y desafíos para fortalecer las evaluaciones de aprendizaje y para informar la mejora educativa. Oímos las perspectivas desde los diferentes sectores y ámbitos y quiero rescatar algunos de los mensajes que oímos durante el día de hoy. Hablamos sobre el uso y los desafíos de las evaluaciones en los diferentes niveles. Tocamos el nivel internacional, regional, nacional e internamente los diferentes niveles en el sistema escolar nacional. Se mencionan algunos de los desafíos y tendencias que podemos ver en la región y sobre los factores que pueden posibilitar y obstaculizar el uso de las evaluaciones de aprendizaje. Adicionalmente, se habló sobre las diferentes perspectivas, implementación y medición sobre la información y educación de los desafíos políticos y culturales en los países. Y se tocaron temas sobre la importancia de enfocarnos en cómo las innovaciones pueden apoyar acorde a cada contexto. La importancia de entender los retos de cada país, los diferentes procesos de creación, implementación y evaluación y cómo se relacionan con la toma de decisiones. Y oímos sobre la importancia de tener una cultura para el uso de la evidencia de evaluación de aprendizajes en todos sus niveles, incluyendo el micro, y la necesidad de evaluar nuestras evaluaciones. Como reflexión, nos deja como reflexión la importancia de poner el foco de las evaluaciones en informar la mejora de los aprendizajes, la comunicación entre los diferentes niveles del sistema educativo, la importancia de la cultura en el uso de la evidencia de evaluación y la importancia del contexto en estas evaluaciones. Adicionalmente, quiero aprovechar la oportunidad para hablar sobre la comunidad de práctica. Como ustedes saben, nuestra comunidad de práctica es una iniciativa para la co-construcción donde la idea es ir descubriendo qué vacíos de conocimiento hay y sobre esto ir co-construyendo diferentes iniciativas. Hoy queremos agradecer a todos por toda la información que ustedes nos dieron con la llenada de los formularios y que compartieron con nosotros. Quiero solo brevemente un poco contarles, tuvimos más de 100 respuestas donde nos compartieron información, entonces muchísimas gracias. Recibimos iniciativas de más de 20 países. Las iniciativas incluyen evaluaciones nacionales, estrategias para la mejora de aprendizajes y evaluación estudiantil. Y también nos compartieron bibliografía. Entonces, muchísimas gracias. Nos compartieron bibliografía de equidad y de la evaluación equitativa, de tutorías remotas, estudios y evaluaciones nacionales. Y todo esto también nos ayuda a informar el policy brief que estamos en este momento construyendo. Entonces, muchísimas gracias. Sobre nuestro policy brief, quiero brevemente explicar un poco lo que estamos haciendo. La idea de este policy brief busca explorar los usos que pueden tener las evaluaciones de aprendizaje para impulsar la mejora educativa. La idea es, según lo que nos digan las evaluaciones de aprendizaje de gran escala, vamos a presentar la evidencia de cómo se pueden usar estos resultados distinguiendo 3 niveles: el nivel macro, el intermedio y a nivel local o escuelas. El foco de este policy brief va a estar enfocado en el nivel escolar. Entonces, a nivel macro, la idea es entender las funciones principales de los resultados de aprendizaje para el diseño, planificación y evaluación de la política educativa. A nivel intermedio, es cómo estas experiencias se usan por parte de las instancias regionales para la orientación de la escuela, y el mayor énfasis, que es a nivel local, es ver cómo las escuelas pueden, a partir de los resultados de aprendizaje, usar estas evaluaciones para movilizar ciclos de mejora interna y buscar la mejora de los aprendizajes. En este policy brief le decidimos dar el foco o la visibilidad al uso escolar, ya que también fueron gran parte de lo que ustedes nos comunicaron y de los temas que nos compartieron y de las dudas que fueron surgiendo con esta comunidad. Entonces, bueno, por mi parte, más bien otra vez, darle las gracias por todos esos insumos que nos dieron. Y bueno, eso sería. Creo que, Rosa, de vuelta a ti.
Gracias, Manuela. Yo te doy el agradecimiento a ti y a todos los que nos han acompañado hoy. Y tengo 3 cosas nada más para cerrar esta sesión. Una es que tal vez pedirles el favor de que nos ayuden llenando una breve encuesta que está en el chat. 2, quizás tenemos la amabilidad de encender nuestras cámaras para que nuestras personas de comunicación tomen una buena foto de esta sesión. Y 3, invitarles mañana a la misma hora en el mismo link con el que se unieron hoy, para que podamos cerrar este ciclo que hemos iniciado hoy. Mañana estaremos contando con el Laboratorio Latinoamericano de Evaluación de la Calidad de la Educación, YESE, UNESCO, con el Caribbean Examination Council, con el Ministerio de Educación de Nicaragua, el Ministerio de Educación de Santa Lucía, el Sindicato de Docentes de Santa Lucía, el IDRC, el Centro Internacional de Investigaciones para el Desarrollo, y la Alianza Mundial para la Educación. Así que muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos hoy y creo que estamos listos para una foto. Aquellos que puedan encender sus cámaras, será ideal. No es obligatorio. Y creo que las personas de comunicaciones nos avisarán si ya lograron captar esta foto.